In this video, I'd like to talk about quality. Not the quality necessarily of your work, of the output of your professional work, but the quality of your attention. I really believe that the quality of our lives are directly correlated with the quality of attention. What do I mean by the quality of our attention? How capable you are to pay undivided attention to something, be it an object, a living being, just an element of nature, a conversation, anything. There is this fear of missing out on things happening in the world typically. And this fear of missing out will, of course, only get more and more exacerbated because it's impossible not to miss out on stuff, given how things advance and how each day it's like a completely new world. And if you want to not miss out on things, you will always be scared of potentially missing on things. Therefore, none of the things you will pay attention to will have really good quality, right? Your focus will always be split and scattered. And I personally consciously started to develop a fear of not paying attention, not giving my undivided attention to things. And how I plan to do that is really straightforward. I don't multitask, or at least this is the theory. It's very difficult to put in practice, but I already know the advantages of living like that, and this is clearly something that I want to double down on going forward. It doesn't have to be a huge amount of time in which you dedicate to any specific thing, but for those 2 seconds that you fix your eyes and your attention on a stranger, even just give them those 2 seconds. If there are 5, there are 5. Well, if it's a stranger and there are 5 seconds, maybe it's a bit inappropriate, but you get the point. The idea is that we should be in the present with what's in front of us and use our attention as a gift to the world in the end. Because our attention, I think it is the most precious gift we can give to the world and to ourselves. Because what we place our attention on, we give energy to. Otherwise, it doesn't enter our conscious awareness and doesn't get to matter in the long term. But if you give something or someone your full attention, it's like offering them something. It's offering them your conscious awareness, which, because it's not polluted with a lot of different other factors, it's really precious in itself, right? You're recognizing someone or something for its very essence, for its very, simple nature in a way, without the labeling, without the background processing in the mind about what you are seeing, why you are seeing that, how what you are seeing fits your anticipation about what you should see instead, and so on. It's a very difficult thing to do because our minds are inevitably the first barrier, ultimately, and the biggest filter possible with the world. And it adds this kind of judgmental overlay on everything that we see and experience. And for practical purposes, of course, that's necessary. In the day-to-day, you need to understand stuff on a conceptual level. You need to interpret things. You need to judge them. You need to see how they serve you, how they can harm you, what you should do, what you should not do. So it's this constant stream of interpretation and judgment, and validation or rejection of things. And again, that's normal, and that's, of course, healthy for a person living in a society who wants to contribute and who wants to have, good dialogue with other members of society. But if you only operate from that place, you are missing out on a deeper reality, if you want, on a deeper kind of essence of things. Because the mind, when we process what happens with us or around us, we are using concepts, we are using words, we are using labels. This is good, this is bad. I don't need this, I need that. I want this, I don't want that. So these are like ultimately very superficial judgments that the mind makes based on how we position ourselves and how we traditionally positioned ourselves towards those elements of comparison. And whenever we see something and perceive something, we automatically add this interpretational layer on top. And based on that, we give it more our attention, or we take away our attention. So our attention ultimately in this level of mind engagement is just telling of our predispositions and biases and beliefs. And either we continue to enforce beliefs by giving in to the inner voice of a mind who is more or less expecting to encounter what it encounters, or we slightly change that inner dialogue with respect to what we are experiencing. But it's still some sort of high-level superficial processing of what's happening out there, right? It's more about the doing of things. It's about the action. It's about the movement. So this deeper reality that I'm talking about is, of course, the kind of reality that all Eastern philosophies and religion and spirituality are pointing to, which is this difficult to articulate essence of things, objects, and the world at large, right? The nature of reality itself is difficult to articulate. But it's so fascinating for me that these days it's quite difficult to get bored when you poke through this superficial layer that the mind adds on top of everything, and I choose to see or focus on this deeper reality, right? I choose to disengage consciously the mind and not default to thinking and labeling and contrasting and judging and criticizing everything that I'm perceiving, and rather just be curious, right? Just use my attention to just look without the compelling need of judging a thing as to be trivial and not deserving my attention. In its very essence, nothing is trivial, nothing is simple, and yet everything is simple. That's also interesting about this kind of deeper thought, deeper reality, is that the words start to break. Language starts not to make sense that much because it's difficult to articulate a reality that the mind was not developed to comprehend in the first place. Words are not meant to talk about the essence of things, the inner world, you know. And that's why this language sometimes is confusing and also potentially dangerous if you just cling to it and you start to attach to certain phrases and words, thinking that now, because you know how to articulate a rather philosophical concept, now that's the goal, and it's not. I always remind myself of Eckhart Tolle when he said that words are just pointers beyond themselves, right? Words are concepts and ultimately superficial representations and descriptions about what we are experiencing as human beings. But words don't make justice to describing the essence of something, right? Words are useful to know about something. I can know, for example, about a tree, right? I know it's green which is again not just a label like green. Green talks about our perception of things as it's interpreted in the brain, and then the mind labels that experience of green with this word, which, yes, it points to an experience, but what does it mean, green? It's just a word, right? It could be blue, but we call it green because blue is different. But it would have been blue for green and green for blue. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter that much. What do I know about the tree more? I know that it has roots. I know that it has branches. I know that it has leaves. I know that it contributes to this, ecosystem of nature. Okay. And is that everything? Well, no, I can know about how it exchanges, energy from the soil, and how the how water gets absorbed and how fruits grow and so on. But it's still a description of it's a functional description of the tree. I can then go in the essence of the material that builds the tree, the actual wood itself. What's the nature of the wood? What's the texture of the wood? And then you go deeper and deeper and deeper into the specs of that specific type of wood, and you can make complete university degrees to know about a very specific, particular element of the tree. So on the one side, you have people who just say, that's just a tree. And on the other hand, you might have people who are deeply curious about the tree, but they still, and even if they learn about the tree for years, they still spend time in this mind-engaged, world in which they want to learn about the tree. But the tree is not its elements only, right? There is some essence to it. There is something about the tree that you cannot know by just describing its components and what's made of and how it operates. There is this intimate understanding of the tree that you can have if you just perceive it without having to judge it, without having to label it, without having to put yourself in contrast to the tree and see how the tree serves you. And if it doesn't serve you, you label it as being just a tree. And if it serves you, it's like, this is my tree where I built, a house for my kid, and then, they spend their summer days there. It's like a more special tree, right? Because it has some sort of value to you. But ultimately, for other person, it's just a tree, right? So the mind creates narratives that make you feel more attached to things, that help you in one way or another. That's why we say that the mind is of the ego, because the ego wants to be, a unique, special individual in the world, wants to recognize us or to enable us to be more special than others, right? That's why you say, when we say that someone has a big ego, they want to be more, to be seen. They want to be perceived as being important. They want to articulate their ideas in a more convincing way than other people's ideas. But again, you can create an infinite amount of content describing things, talking about trees, which are just trees, right? Are not even that important to us, but you can then spend an infinite amount of time and infinite real estate of pages in books talking about human beings and animals who are infinitely more complex, and how they operate and why they operate like that, and the psychology part and so on. And it's nice to do that. I do that a lot because I'm curious and I'm just interested to learn about things. But I'm also interested to be able not to have to learn about things in that way, and get to know things by just allowing them to be and looking at them and perceiving them as being an integral part of life itself, not unlike me that much. So just appreciate things to be how they are, where they are. Just observe. right? The quality of the attention is not about how fast and how sharp your judgment can be about something, but rather how able are you not to engage your mind when you are giving attention to something? How able are you to look at a human being and just recognize its presence without thinking if they are good looking, if they are your friends, if you like them, if you hate them, if you should make friends of them, if you should avoid them? Are you able to do that? With human beings, of course, it's very difficult. So maybe you should start with just a tree, right? If you start with just a tree, it's easier to convince the mind to not engage because that tree is not that threatening for the ego and for the mind. The tree just is there, so you can just look at it. And just see how easy it is for you to do this exercise. And do it first for 1 minute. 1 minute. I'm not saying that you should look at the tree for 1 hour. You can do that, but I mean, in normal states of consciousness, I'm not sure that it's even recommended. But just give 1 minute, right? Just look 1 minute at the tree and see if you can make it without starting to think, oh, this is just a waste of time, man. Come on, really? Do I have to now look at this tree for 1 minute? Okay, let's inspect the roots. Okay, not very interesting. You will see your incapacity to not think. And when I personally realized that it's impossible for me to not think, first it was a revelation. Then I got to be a bit annoyed. Then I got to be a bit scared, right? Because I knew that if I compulsively analyze everything that I'm perceiving, it means that I'm not free. It means that I'm just controlled by my mind. No matter if the narrative is good or bad, the fact that I cannot hold myself from having this inner dialogue, which is, by the way, the default mode of, the default healthy way of how the brain should function, right? It's called the default mode network. So whenever you are not thinking consciously of solving a problem, like when you are not engaged in deep analytical thinking, you are thinking about yourself. This is called the default mode network in the brain. You are thinking about yourself, about others, about what you will do tomorrow, planning for the future, recalling past events for different reasons, right? But this is the normal functioning of the brain. And yet, the fact that you have the capacity to just perceive things without having to think about them, it's just nothing short of amazing for me. And I'm still amazed today that this is possible and that virtually everyone just goes through life without knowing that thinking happens to them. They don't think consciously, thinking just happens. And all those thoughts, all those thought streams, they just happen like compulsively, and then they try to steer them in one way or another and integrate all those thoughts onto already existing beliefs and views of the world and interpretations and judgments. So it's just about those thoughts do nothing more than, for most of the time, reinforcing existing narratives, which ultimately give the person a sense of understanding about the world, gives them safety. The fact that I now can anticipate slightly better something because I experienced this and now I understand and I interpret those thoughts, now I feel better, but it doesn't change ultimately that much from how you operate day by day. So going back to the tree, take 1 minute. It's a challenge even. Just take 1 minute and look at the tree without having to judge it, without having to try to find interesting things about it, without looking at how many components it has, without trying to engage the mind at all, the analytical part of the mind, you will see how difficult it is. And it's your decision ultimately to see this as a potential obstacle in you having a full life experience, or is a feature that you like. But be honest with yourself. And whatever answer comes, just know that there is a way to not have to think all the time. And if you discover that there is this way and you start to exercise it like a muscle, and occasionally take 1 minute to look at seemingly non-interesting objects and give that seemingly uninteresting thing your full attention, your life virtually transforms. Because you start to poke at this deeper reality whenever you want and see things there that are not visible to the eye of the mind, if you want. They're not visible to a mind who always engages in inner interpretational dialogue. The things which are there, by their essence, always have something more to tell than the mind can capture. And that's always beautiful to see. And that's why you cannot get bored, basically, for the rest of your life, when you can see this. And that's the beginning. That's just the beginning. But it's a nice journey. It's a nice journey if you begin to see that nothing is what it seems on the outside. There is a deeper essence of everything. Your life starts to transform. You will start to appreciate much more everything that you have around you, including and especially other human beings, who are infinitely complex and interesting. And you can just be curious without judging the nature of the human being in itself, the nature of a person, understand that person better, give them your full attention without you having to judge them first. You can imagine how much of an improvement that can be to your life. Because this interpretation layer, this overlay, doesn't apply just to trees. It applies to everything by default. That's your filter again. That's how you interpret everything in your life, including other people. You judge them by default. The first compulsive thing that you do when you interact with people is to judge them. And not necessarily judge them like in a negative way, but assess how they can serve you and what you should do about them, right? How you should interact with them and so on. And if you don't add that, if you just give people their full attention, you make them this gift that they cannot make to themselves. They cannot give this gift themselves of being fully aware of themselves or of the world without always being compelled to think, but you can do it for them. You can offer them this space in which you are just observing them as they are without casting judgment, and see what it happens. Good luck.